Okay, good evening everybody. Let us start our third week. We have already covered 2 weeks and in every week we had 4 classes. So this is our 9th session. In the last session, we started talking about the project life cycle, and this is the very end of the second chapter of PMBOK. This is a very important topic, project life cycle. And in previous lecture, we did talk about the meaning of project life cycle, why should the project life cycle be in phases, and why these phases should not overlap. I'm not saying that it is something which is necessary that they will never overlap, but primarily we want to establish a rule that they are surgical separations within a project. Every phase should be self-contained in itself, and it should produce something, some output, some deliverable, and only after a phase has delivered its deliverable, then can we allow the project to move into the next phase. That is another matter, that sometimes we start the next phase while the previous phase is still in approvals. So that much we can do, but generally speaking, the phases should be segregated from each other and they should be separate. Then in a previous slide, we also saw that these phases could be predictive in nature or adaptive. So the life cycle which is predictive is like plan driven. Meaning what? That we have got almost everything amply clear to us. There is not that much of uncertainty in this project, so we can plan ahead. We can almost plan the whole project to the best of our knowledge. So such a life cycle would be a predictive life cycle, in which we can plan even the next and next to next phases, and even till end of the project we can have a fairly good idea how the project will go ahead with it. But in some projects which are adaptive in nature are change driven, and such projects we can never be sure what are we going to do in the next phase. So we come up with an outline plan for the whole project, then divide it into phases, and we describe the first phase in detail and start working on it. The second phase, the next phase, will be defined when the knowledge becomes available, the information becomes available, and that information which currently is available about the next phases may change. It's a high likelihood that the information may change, and we are going to be highly flexible. We will only concentrate on the current phase, and while other changes are happening in the future design of the project, we will accommodate to that. That is called adaptive life cycle. An extreme of this adaptive life cycle is agile approach, in which we tend to reduce the size of every phase to a bare minimum level, as if the period of flexibility could be increased and enhanced. So in adaptive life cycle, the size of a phase is like 2 weeks to 6 weeks maximum. That way we are working, concentrating on the current phase, and we are not worried about the work which is changing constantly. The requirements are changing. The work which is to be done will change in future phases. We don't call them phases here in Agile. We call them iterations. Or in one of the Agile techniques, which is called Scrum, we call these sprints. 2 to 6 weeks is the length of a sprint. The interesting thing about Agile is that unlike normal project management, traditional project management, the size of each iteration or phase is fixed. It is either 2 weeks, 3, 4, or up up to 6 weeks, but whatever the size you select, that is fixed. You can't change it. Whereas in normal project management, what we do is we do not size our phases by their duration, but by their deliverable. We segregate the project into surgical portions, which we call phases, and every portion is supposed to be delivering something important. So this is just the importance of the deliverable which makes up the phase. It could be, the first phase could be 3 months long and the next phase could be 9 months long. So this all depends upon the deliverable we are trying to deliver out of that phase. So that was a little overview about it. Then we talked about the names and the number of phases, and we did say that the name of phases should be relevant to what we are doing in that phase. This has nothing to do with the project management. If you are, your phase is pre-project planning, then you can call it pre-project phase. If your phase is construction of walls, or you can call it construction of superstructure phase, or whatever you want to call it, but that would be relevant to what you are doing in that phase. So if somebody has an idea that the process groups may be called as phases, it is wrong. I corrected it last time also. The name of process groups is not phase. They are process groups, they are not phases. And the reason why? Because the process groups have a lot of overlap. Some of the processes are happening, simultaneously while the execution is going on. A lot many monitoring and control processes are to happen in parallel with that. So there is so much of parallelism in these process groups that we cannot call them phases at all. But generally, if we are not talking specifically about a project, a very generic project, although this is not a good practice to give an example of a generic project for project management, but if it is a generic project, say I have divided it into following 4 phases. Now, when I say this, please do not relate it to the process groups. These are not process groups. These are just random names we have picked for each of the 4 phases. So we have put all that work in phase 1, which was to initiate or to start the project work. It may be the preparations, it may be forming the teams and things like that. So let us call phase 1 as starting a project. Then maybe we are planning, drawing, organizing our team, training, providing training to them, preparing them for work, things like that. That could be called as phase 2, that is organizing and preparing. Similarly, in the third phase, where the project is being implemented, we call it carrying out phase. You see, if you want to relate it to execution, this is not execution alone. Basically, carrying out work means execution and monitoring and control are happening simultaneously. Therefore, this has no relationship with the process groups. This is just a name given to that portion of work where the things are being implemented. And finally, when you have done everything, you do some reviews and audits and handing over of the deliverable and all that. That could be called as closing or whatever you want to call it. So let us assume these are not standard names for the phases, not at all. This is just an example being given to you. So let us suppose that these are the 4 phases of our project, a generic project. Okay, this generic life cycle structure is often referred to when communicating with upper management or other entities less familiar with the details of the project. You see, this kind of life cycle structure could be more understandable to people who do not know the technical details of your project, and they may be, very happy about it that we have started the project, we are implementing it, or we have done the job and things like that. Therefore, this generic life cycle is more understandable to people who are non-technical and who are sitting up there. It should not be confused with the project management process groups. That's exactly what I said. Do not ever think or assume that these are in any way related to the process group, because the processes in process group consist of activities that may be performed and recur within each phase of a project. Why? You see, when we are doing a phase, every phase is like a mini project. Every phase has its own deliverable or output or deliverable, product, service or result, and every phase has to be treated like a mini project. It has to be chartered, it has to be initiated, planned, executed, monitoring and controlled, and ultimately closed. Therefore, there is a lot of iteration in every phase. Every phase will go through this iteration. The project life cycle is independent from the life cycle of the product produced by or modified by the project. Why I am saying that? Because we did discuss the definition of project life cycle and the product life cycle. Project life cycle is going to be different from the product life cycle, because life cycle means, we discussed that life cycle means that something starts from the inception, ideation. When the idea of this thing came to your mind, the life cycle started. And when this will be no more, this will be divested, this will be completely out of the market, that would be the time then your life cycle will finish. So as far as project is concerned, we definitely have a starting point and a finishing point, because uh, with the initiation process or with the authorization of the project, we can start the project life cycle and we can finish it when we have delivered everything to the customer. But as far as product is concerned, there is a lot of confusion. People think that product is related with the project, and when the project produces a product, only then its life cycle starts, which is not actually correct. Product is a much broader thing than a project. The product of the project is conceived maybe decades ago, maybe many years ago. And by the time it was conceived, the life cycle of the product had already started. You might have developed a business case for that, or a feasibility for that, or pilot project for that. That all could have been separate projects. And ultimately, you are right now producing that product. And once you produce that product, the project life cycle may finish, but the product life cycle will continue. Maybe there are some bugs in the product. There is yet another project to improve the product. A new version of the product comes into the market through another project. So another project life cycle will go on and finish, but the product life cycle is continuous. Product life cycle will go on until and unless product is no more needed and it stops the production and support. That would be the time when the product life cycle finishes. Therefore, we can safely say that in our product life cycle, there could be a number of project life cycles. The project should take the current life cycle phase of the product into consideration. Where are you in the product life cycle? What is the project you are trying to do? What are you trying to do with that product? Are you coming up with a new version of the product? You are, providing maintenance services for that product. You are actually creating that product, or you are creating a feasibility study for that product. Whatever is your project must be mentioned, must be clearly marked with the product life cycle. This high-level view can provide a common frame of reference for comparing the projects, even they are dissimilar in nature. So whatever kind of industry you are in, whatever kind of project you are doing, by this high level view, you probably can relate to any kind of project anywhere in the world. This is how this generic life cycle can be diagrammatically shown. You see this, the line which is drawn here, the curved line. This is showing against time and cost, or you can say cost and staffing level are on one side and time is on the other side. So time shows the life cycle of the project. During the life cycle of the project, your spending of money and usage of your staff, the money you will spend on all this will gradually increase as you start the project. You see, the phases are being indicated here. Starting the project, every phase should have a deliverable. So what is the deliverable of starting the project? Maybe project charter is the deliverable for that. There has to be a deliverable for every phase. Otherwise, the purpose of that phase is no more. Similarly, then organizing and preparing phase, maybe the deliverable is project management plan, or it could be anything else relevant to your project. It could be a document, it could be a physical product or whatever. I'm not saying that these are going to be the standard outputs of these of the delivery of the phases, but because your phases are going to be different every phase, whatever the job is being done in that phase, that kind of product would come out of it. And naturally, once you deliver that deliverable or the product out of that phase, you have achieved a milestone. So every big accomplishment within a project is a milestone. The completion of the project and the deliverable of the ultimate and end product is a milestone. Similarly, starting up the project was the first phase. Project charter is our big accomplishment of this phase. Ultimate accomplishment of phase 1 is developing coming up with a project charter. Similarly, if organizing and preparing is a phase, maybe project management plan is a deliverable, another milestone achieved. When you carry out the work, the interesting part is, as soon as you actually get into the implementation of the project, your expenses and your staffing level steeply increases. That shows the mobilization in your project. A lot of money and staff is pumped into the project, and ultimately when it is on full run, you will come to the peak of your expenses, and then your expenses would kind of stabilize. You will be spending almost the same amount of time, money and resources in that period of time when the work is at the peak. And as soon as work starts getting completed, your expenses and staff starts getting shed off. Your expenses start decreasing, and that is a sudden process because everything is coming to an end. And in the closing process group, this is just the culmination where everything completes. All the expenses are made, and naturally the expenses towards the end are decreasing gradually till they reach zero, and same is the case with the staffing levels. So this way, you see, you have got this curve which shows the whole life cycle of the project. And remember, the cost and staffing levels shown here are not cumulative in nature. They are not cumulative in nature. They are actually like cash flows. How much money is required at a specific point in time. So this is showing the spending of money or the staffing levels throughout the life cycle. If you want to do it in shape of a cumulative graph, that would be how much money has been spent so far. That would make a completely different graph. And that graph is usually said as a S-curve. We will not talk about it right now, but later on in cost, we will discuss what is a S curve and how is it made. But generally speaking, if these are the actual values on this graph, if you start putting the values as cumulative values will raise the graph higher. And because it is a cumulative value, your graph will never come down. So it will keep rising upwards till the expenses start getting lower towards the end of the project life cycle. In closing phase, your expenses would be less. So that S curve would be tilted a little downwards there. But naturally, we will talk about it later. So this is a generic example of a project life cycle. So you see in this that cost and staffing levels, that is one characteristic that rises slowly in the beginning, reaches a peak, and then when the project implementation is happening, it remains at the peak for some time, and then as the work starts completing, it starts coming down. Now, in that graph, the interesting part is your stakeholders' influence. What about that? When are you going to exercise or feel the effect of stakeholder influence the most? In the beginning of the project or the end of the project? Anyone please? When will the stakeholder influence be maximum? Yes, sir. Mohsen?
Sir, usually, I mean, if we are planning properly, then, I mean, during the planning, stakeholders should be taken on board. So I guess it should be.
Okay, fine. What do you think, Vijay?
So I think, I mean, yeah, planning stage is one part, but I think also maybe even during the maybe if there's a review meeting, I guess it's a continuous thing, right? So I guess starting and end, and also maybe even in the middle as well during
Right.
review.
Wonderful.
At the end as well.
You see, the whole thing is hinged on one thing, and that is in the beginning of the project, you have the highest level of uncertainty. You don't know what is going to happen to you, although you plan your best. And planning your best, a part of that is you get involved with the stakeholders, you ask them what they want, you understand them, you understand their needs and expectations. So in the beginning, when the uncertainty is high and the risk is very high in the beginning, you are accepting whatever the stakeholder says. So you are being receptive. So you are accepting a lot of influence from the stakeholder. And that was the time when project manager was not really very well versed with the project. He actually was learning what the project really is. Now, as he understands the project after having consulted many stakeholders, and he is now, kind of have got an idea about the level of uncertainty and the risk in the project, probably at that time he is a bit firm, a bit more educated. And now if somebody comes up with a new requirement, he is in a position to challenge that and say, well, this does not go well with your previous requirement. So may you please revise it? So you see, now he after having understood the things, now he is getting a bit firmer on the ground. So as he plans the things, that he becomes more firm. So more firm he becomes, less is the influence of the stakeholder. A little less stakeholder influence will start impacting him, and a little risk, less of uncertainty and risk. But when he has completed his plan, and now somebody tells him that, everything we told you was wrong, that is a big change. He will not accept that kind of whole change influence. But if there is small little things to be accommodated, if there is a change in plan in a certain area, stakeholder influence can be accepted, but not like we were doing in the very beginning. So we are a bit more certain about the things by the end of planning. But once we get into execution, the things start happening, the money start getting spent, the output is about to be created. Now we have started developing the product. Now if something changes, I don't say that nothing can change, still things can change, but naturally there is a harder barrier now because we have even crossed the planning and we are now in the construction. So probably we can only influence those things more which are rather in the future. So overall influence of the stakeholder has decreased. Risk, so we were not very wise in the beginning when we were identifying the risks and we were highly uncertain. Now we understand a lot many risks because we are in execution. We have faced some of them. We have been aware of more risks at this stage. We are wiser now. Therefore, the impact of risks is also reduced. The uncertainty is also reduced, and this will continue reducing till the end of the project. And by the time the project ends, stakeholder will have no influence at all. There will be no more risks left. There will be no more uncertainty. So you see, if I can show you in shape of a graph, it would be something like this. The upper line, if you can see, this shows the stakeholder influence, risk and uncertainty. So it is highest in the beginning, and during the planning period, this remains high. But by the end of planning, it starts declining slowly. You get into the execution of the project, in the implementation of the project, it gradually keeps coming down, and by the end of the project, the stakeholder influence, risk and uncertainty are no more. On the other hand, if you want to change anything at any stage in the project and during the life cycle of the project, the cost of change in the beginning is minimal. We are planning something and you tell me to change something, it's very easy for me to change it in the plans rather to change it actually on ground. Because still we have not started working on ground, there is nothing on ground, so this is inexpensive. So changes brought as early in the project life cycle of the project as possible are the cheapest. But as we move ahead, the cost of changes exponentially increase towards the end. If right at the end of the project somebody tells you to the whole design was not correct and we are coming up with a new design of the building, so what should you do? You have already constructed the building. So either you have to demolish the whole structure and start redoing everything, and that is the cost of change. But even during the implementation or execution, if there is such like change, the cost will be very high. So cost of change exponentially increases during the life cycle of the project. As we have already discussed, a project may be divided into a number of phases, and I did discuss with you how many phases. We said not many phases. The number of phases should be kept to a minimum because we do not want to complicate the situation. I don't want to have 1000 phases. Who will remember those 1000 phases? Who will keep a track of these 1000 phases? So no matter how big a project is, although it all depends upon the type of project and the length of project and the complexity of the project, how many phases you want to have, but at the same time, the formula remains the same, that we want to have a minimal number of phases. And that minimal number should be such that you can easily remember. There is no problem if you want to subdivide a phase into further subphases. if there is such a complexity in the project, you may do that. But the main project should be divided into very few phases, and generally it would be a good practice if you remain within 3 and 7 phases. That is good. I don't stop you from going to 10 phases or 13 phases, but naturally that would be really very difficult to handle. And if you, as you keep increasing the number of phases, your understanding of the project, your control of the project, everything will be lost. Project phase is a collection of logically related project activities. So every phase must be so segregated that it should have related work to be done. Meaning that whatever is being produced in this phase should be predefined, and all the work being done in this phase must be contributing towards that deliverable. So every project phase will have its own deliverable, and that culminates in the completion of that one or more deliverables. Project phases are used when the nature of the work to be performed is unique to a portion of the project and are typically linked to the development of a specific major deliverable. So what we are trying to do is we are moving in stages. One after the other, we are accomplishing the milestones, and ultimately by the end of the project we have achieved all the milestones, and thus we complete the project. So this is natural progression, one after the other in a sequential manner towards the end product. So every phase will have its own product, but those products would be contributing towards the end product. A phase may emphasize processes from a particular project management process group, but it is likely that most for all processes will be executed in some form in each phase. Now why it says that? Number one, every phase is a mini project. We said that. And all the rules applied to a project applies to a phase. So all the 5 process groups, all the 47 processes are applicable to every phase. Every phase may go through initiation, planning, execution, monitoring and control and close, but at the same time we already have studied that none of these processes, the 47 processes, are mandatory in nature. So looking at the requirement of that specific phase, you may decide not to do certain processes and to do certain others. But out of those 47 processes, you can pick and choose whichever is applicable to your phase. So from that perspective, every phase may have different processes, but those different processes from project management perspective are actually taken from the project management process groups. Project phases typically are completed sequentially. That is what we said. That is what we emphasize. Try to do your project phases one after the other, but they can overlap. Now when we are making an allowance that a phase can overlap the other phase, that essentially does not mean that 2 phases can be so parallel that they start together and end together. Not at all. If 2 phases are starting together and finishing together, they are not phases at all. They should not be called as phases. Rather, these 2 streams of work should be joined into a single phase. So the overlap which is allowable is like, the first phase is in approvals and it is taking a lot of time. So maybe I can decide to start the next phase and take this much risk that this approval will not come. So if it will not come, and that will affect my second phase might have to be stopped. But if on a better assumption, if that approval is received in time and we have started the second phase already, so all that work we have done on second phase is validated. There is no problem undoing it. But in case the first phase is not approved, that may affect the work we have already carried out in the next phase. it may be trashed. So different phases typically have a different duration or effort. This is what we said. We said in Agile, the things are different. In Agiles, all the phases are what we call them iterations are of equal size, equal duration. Here, in traditional project management, no, they are not of equal size or equal duration. They are segregated based on the work involved in that phase, what you want to do. If you are constructing the walls, that will take specific period of time, so you dedicate that much time to that phase. And the next phase, maybe you are casting the roof slab and it takes less time, so maybe you dedicate lesser time for that. So every phase may have different size, different time. The high level nature of project phases make them an element of the project life cycle. Because they are the direct bifurcations of the project, therefore the phases, a project life cycle is made up of phases. So they contribute directly towards the project itself. The phase structure allows the project to be segmented into logical subsets for ease of management, planning and control. You see, at any one time you would be doing only one phase. So you don't need to put your all your resources in the management of everything else. You just manage this phase and this is your project for the time being. When this phase is done, then we will move on to the next phase, and then that much is it. So we have broken our work into shorter capsules, and now it is better to manage, easier to manage, plan and control. The number of phases, the need for phases, and the degree of control applied depend on the size, complexity, and the potential impact of the project. Naturally, you are from different areas, you are from different, industries and countries and projects. So you can observe that every project might be different from the other project. So this all depends upon the size, complexity, and the impact that project is going to create, that we decide exactly the number of phases, the need for phases, and the degree of control you want to exercise. If you want to exercise more control, what will you do? You will have shorter duration phases. More control, you will have more control. If you don't have any phases, the whole project is one big phase, then your control is not that much. This is the most worst case of exercising the control, that you are trying to manage everything together. Anyways, regardless of the number of phases comprising in a project, all phases have similar characteristics. In every phase, you have to produce something. You have to go through the project management process groups: initiation, planning, execution, monitoring, control, and close. And almost the same kind of thing will happen in every phase, as far as the approvals and other need, expectations, stakeholder engagement, and all that is concerned. Okay, the characteristics of the project phases. The work has a distinct focus that differs from any other phase. Now, although we have said already that these phases have got many similarities, they all have product, they all are done through processes, they all have to go through initiation to close, but at the same time, every phase has got its own distinct identity. They are producing something different from the other phase. This often involves different organizations, locations, and skill sets. So if I have people with a different skill set and you have people with a different skill set, the same kind of project might be done in a different way. Achieving the primary deliverable or objective of the phase requires controls or processes unique to the phase or its activities. The repetition of processes across all 5 process groups provides an additional degree of control and defines the boundaries of the phase. So what we are doing in every phase, we are applying all the 5 process groups. And we are focusing only on one phase at a time and applying all the process groups on this one phase. So we are better equipped to control this phase. Number one, this phase is a smaller version of the whole project. Number two, we are applying all the management controls over it. So we will be able to better perform in this phase, and once this is done, then we can move on to the next phase, and you keep doing that and exercising this degree of control throughout. The closure of a phase ends with some form of transfer or hands-off of the work product produced as the phase deliverable. Phase 1 has completed. The output of the phase 1, the deliverable of the phase 1 might be input of the phase 2. This phase end represents a natural point to reassess the activities underway. Number 1, it was a transfer and a handoff point. The items coming out of phase 1 can be, input into the phase 2. Number 2, when we complete a phase, we can review, we can stop, we may not go on into the phase 2. We can stop and observe and review what we have done in this phase, what is good and what is bad. We can reassess our activities underway and to change or terminate the project if necessary. If you think based on the performance of phase 1, you want to change your overall outline plan, that you can do. That means you have got flexibility, you are adaptable now. From this point onward, you are adaptable. You can bring any changes in the remaining project, and you even can decide that you do not need to go any further in the life of the project and you want to terminate the project right here. That is exactly why this point where the phase ends, a phase ends, is also called a go no-go decision, or this point may be referred to as a stage gate, a milestone, a phase review, a phase gate, or a kill point. Why kill point? Because the project could be killed at this point. If there is enough reason, it could be a kill point. So this is a decision point where you decide whether you want to move ahead with the project, move on to the next phase or not. This is a gateway. That's exactly why we are calling it stage gate or phase gate. And at that point, we have achieved a milestone. That's why we call it a milestone also. So there could be many names to this point. In any case, the closure of a phase is required to be approved, and in some form before it can be considered closed. So this is exactly the point where your top level executives or your project board members should physically come and review and approve your closure of the phase and allow you to move ahead with the next phase. This is the review point. This is the intersection point. This is the point where the project board can watch how the things are happening and they have control over this point. If there is only one single phase in your project and you do not have a number of phases, that is also possible, and that probably would be applicable for a very small little project which which you do not feel that it should be divided into further phases. You can do that. That is allowable, that you have only one phase in the project. Although industry common practices will often lead to the use of a preferred structure, projects in the same industry or even in the same organization may have significant variation. So project to project there will be differences. Some will have only one phase and some will have many phases. And many means naturally there is an upper limit. You don't want to have so many phases that you can't control. Some organizations have established policies that standardize all products. If you have got standardized products, then probably you may have standardized project life cycle. That means all your projects will have to follow the predefined life cycle for the projects. But that could be possible in some organizations. In other organizations, the case could be very different. You could be allowed to take precedence from some industry standard life cycle or some other life cycle, or you may be allowed to design your own life cycle. Like it says, while others allow the project team to choose and tailor the most appropriate approaches for the individual projects. Like one organization may treat a feasibility study as a routine pre-project work. Another organization may treat it as a first phase of the project. Another organization may treat the feasibility study as a separate standalone project. So this is just a way of viewing at it. The complexity of feasibility might be so much that it could be treated as a separate project. It might be, if it is a um, agile kind of a project, or you can say adaptive project, then probably feasibility is the first phase, and based on the decision of feasibility, you decide to move ahead with the other activities of the project. So that could be the case. One project team may divide a project in two phases, whereas another project team may choose to manage all the work as a single phase. So the same project, if I give it to one team, they have a different decision. They say they will manage the whole thing as a single project, as a single phase. Another team might like to divide it into 2, 3 or 4 phases, or whatever they feel like. So there is not a standard that you always will have these kind of phases. But if it is left upon the team, that it is a decision of the team, how many phases they want to do this project. Much depends on the nature of the specific project and style of the project team or organization. When projects have more than one phases, the phases are part of a generally sequential process designed to ensure proper control and attain the desired product, service, or result. As I have described earlier, if you keep accomplishing the targets of each phase one after the other in a sequential manner, you will have better control over your project, and you will have more assurance that the ultimate product, service, or result will be delivered. There are situations when a project might benefit from overlapping or concurrent phases. So we sometimes may like to have some overlap in the phases, and that is always for the good. Maybe it actually depends upon your capacity to absorb risks. If you are a risk taker, you may say that, okay, this work is held up due to certain reason, and ultimately it will finish, but why not start the next phase simultaneously? Why? Because whatsoever job I'll do on phase 2, on the next phase, would be at risk of being cancelled based on the result of the approval of phase 1. So there could be two types of phase-to-phase relationships. One is a sequential relationship and other is a overlap relationship. So just a minute. Yeah. In this diagram, you can see a phase-to-phase sequential relationship in which every phase is surgically separate from the other phase. Every phase, like facilitating decommissioning is the first phase. In this phase, we have got all the 5 process groups being applied in this phase. You can see we are initiating this phase, we are planning it, we are executing it, we are monitoring and controlling it, and we are closing it, and ultimately we are delivering the deliverable of this phase, that is facility decommissioning. So probably the milestone would be achieved when the facility has been decommissioned. Once the facility has been decommissioned, we move on to the next phase, and that is the waste removal or cleanup. And in this, we again will go through all the 5 process groups, deliver its result, and move on to the third phase, and so on and so forth. So this is a clean-cut sequential relationship, which should be followed, but sometimes it is not really possible to do things like that, and we resort to the overlapping relationship, in which a phase starts prior to the completion of the previous one. This can sometimes be applied as an example of schedule compression technique called fast tracking. How many of you are aware about fast tracking? Yes, please. What is fast tracking? Asad, can you help me? Okay. Mohsin says, no idea. Asad, I have not heard your voice today. Okay. Okay. Rijo?
It's somehow optimizing the whole.
Yeah, exactly. This is a schedule compression technique. Yes.
Not required, maybe. Yeah.
This is a schedule compression technique. There are two schedule compression techniques. One is called fast tracking, another is crashing. We'll talk about them in the chapter of scheduling, but for now, we just want to talk about fast tracking. Fast tracking is if we have got sequential activities and we want to do the job faster, we can create some kind of overlap and thus reduce the overall time. So it says here that this is kind of a schedule compression where phases are being a little overlapped and the overlap period actually helps reduce the overall time of the project. But at the same time, remember, whenever you are resorting to fast tracking, you are actually putting yourself at risk. Although it does not cause immediate expenses, the money you have to spend on each work, even if this work is being done simultaneously, you will spend same money. But the problem is you will be utilizing that money faster, number one, so that there could be problems with the cash flows. Number two, you are putting that much work at risk of the next phase you have done without the approval of the first phase, because first phase may not get approved, and therefore all the work you have done for the next phase might go for a waste completely. I'll give you an example which will make the things a bit easier. Maybe you are constructing a multi-story building and the first floor you have completed and it needs approval. Only then you should be moving on to the next phase and the next floor. But the people who had to approve it, they are taking too much time and you have been told to move ahead with the next phase while you will get the approval for phase 1 and approval doesn't come. But you have completed the phase 2 as well. Now, once they disapprove the work on phase 1, the first floor is ordered to be demolished. What will happen to your good work you have done on the second phase? That will automatically get demolished. So it is a waste. So you have taken the risk that it may not get approved and you have invested your money on second phase just based on some promises, then probably you are putting yourself at risk. Overlapping phases may require additional resources to allow working to be done in parallel. So additional resources, yes, more money will be spent at a specific point in time, but that money would anyways be spent later. The only change is that you are spending that money earlier in overlap phases. If there is a job of $100 and then next job is of $50, and if you have overlapped these two jobs, then the money spent would be $150, but it would be spent earlier and together. And as I said, it will increase your risk and it may result in rework. It may result in rework even of the good work you have done, that also may have to be demolished and redone. If a subsequent phase progresses before accurate information is available from the previous phase. There is a lot of input goes into the next phase from the previous phase, and previous phase is yet not complete. Lessons learned are not there. The inputs are not there. How have you started working on the next phase? You have taken a lot of risk here. This is how it looks like when you are working with the overlapping phases. You see the design phase is still going on. It is still not closed, but much before it's closed, you have already started the construction work, right? So I don't say this is not possible. I am saying yes, of course, people do it like that, and that is very much applicable also. But this increases the risk. This we must always keep in mind. So we have got overlaps, we have got sequential, and the third type could be parallel, which is rejected altogether. We don't want to start two phases together. So overlapping and parallel are not exactly the same. Overlap is a little overlap in between two phases, and a parallel means that they are running together, which is not applicable. Following considerations determine the relationship be applied between the phases. The level of control you want to acquire. If you don't want a lot of control, you may decide to go for fast tracking because you don't want control. You want to take more risk. You want to deal with. You do not want to deal with uncertainty. So uncertainty will increase. When you will lose control, when you will overlap, you lose control, uncertainty will increase, risk will increase, and maybe your effectiveness is also impacted by that. Based on these considerations, both relationships could occur between different phases of a single project. Predictive life cycle, as we said earlier, predictive life cycle is what? Where we know fairly well. So it is well, it is a plan-driven kind of a thing, fully plan-driven. In predictive life cycle, we are doing something we have done a lot many times. We have got, figures for that, information for that, everything. We can even plan the whole project. Every phase, the whole project in detail, we can plan beforehand. The project scope and time and cost required to deliver the scope are determined as early in the project life cycle because of less uncertainty. These projects proceed through a series of sequential or overlapping phases. So there could be some overlaps, there could be sequences, but the project can proceed ahead. Each phase generally focusing on a subset of project activities and project management processes. The work performed in each phase is usually different in nature to that of the preceding or the subsequent phase, and the makeup and skills required of the project team may vary from phase to phase. This is a general definition. This is how normally the projects do happen, the predictive way. This is how predictive life cycle looks like. You keep doing one job after the other and you keep moving forward. The only thing is, this is normally called a waterfall model in IT. IT people remember this thing as a waterfall model in which you first collect requirements, then create feasibilities, then do planning, then you do designing, and so on and so forth. But why this upward arrow is shown with every one connection, that shows if something, when you are creating the feasibility and you find some of the requirements were not right and they have to be corrected, then you can go back and fix one step upward. You can fix the previous phase. So this is an example of a waterfall or a predictive life cycle. When the project is initiated, the project team will focus on defining the overall scope because the uncertainty is less, so it is very easy to have a definite kind of a scope. So overall scope is pretty much known in this case. And if it is so well known, then it is very easy to develop a plan to deliver that product which is in mind. And you then proceed through phase to phase and ultimately execute each one of them and keep meeting your scope. Changes to a project scope are carefully managed in this case, and if there is replanning required, you do replanning, you amend your plans, and for every change there would be a formal acceptance. So the scope keeps getting revised. This is a traditional way of doing the projects, predictive life cycle. They are generally preferred when the product to be delivered is well understood, scope is clear, well understood. There is a substantial base of industry practice where a product is required to be delivered in full to have value to stakeholder groups. You can't deliver the product in parts. Although you may create, still you may create things in parts, in phases, but the delivery has to be done only at the end. So that makes a case for a predictive life cycle. Even projects with predictive life cycles may use the concept of rolling wave planning. Rolling wave planning, you understand? as we move ahead, we keep planning in detail. So yes, we know everything up to certain level of detail, but if we keep learning something new, we will keep adding that in our plan subsequently through rolling wave planning. Where a more general high-level plan is available and more detailed planning is executed for appropriate time windows as new work activities are approaching and resources are to be assigned. So any such changing environment could be even accommodated in predictive life cycles. Then are the iterative and incremental life cycles. These are ones in which project phases are called iterations, just as I said in case of Agile. So here your each phase is called an iteration, and iteration means that we will have to stop at the end of this iteration and review what we have done and think if we can proceed ahead or not, because we don't know what is the next phase. We have to design the next phase at the end of phase 1. So it might, we might have to repeat the previous phase altogether once again. So intentionally repeat one or more project activities as the project team's understanding of the project increases. So we keep learning by doing and improving and moving towards the next iteration. Iterations develop the product through a series of repeated cycles, while increments successively add to the functionality of the product. So slow and steady, your product starts getting developed, and interestingly, the requirements and specifications of product were not completely known in the beginning. We are learning those specifications and requirements, and we are building as we move. These life cycles develop the product both iteratively and incrementally. It goes in iterations, and the product is being developed in small increments. Iterative and incremental projects may proceed in phases. Naturally, these are phases which we are calling the iterations. Iterations will be performed in a sequential or overlapping fashion. So again, even if you are going through a iterative or incremental life cycle, you could be sequential, you could be overlapping. During an iteration, activities from all project management process groups will be performed. We already know that. At the end of each iteration, a deliverable or set of deliverables will be completed. This is also normal. Future iterations may enhance those deliverables or create new ones. So the future iterations, which we don't know right now, what are going to be the future iterations, but they would serve to, improve your deliverable or enhance or add some functionality to your deliverable. Each iteration iteratively builds the deliverables under the exit criteria for the phase are met until the exit criteria. So what is the exit criteria for a phase? When it has met his objective, only then we can get disengaged from this phase and move on to the next phase, allowing the project team to incorporate feedback. In most iterative life cycles, a high-level vision will be developed for the overall undertaking, but the detailed scope is elaborated on one iteration at a time. As I said before, the outline plan is created. A high-level vision is there. We know generally what is going to be produced, but at the same time, we don't know the specifications and details about that deliverable. So what we start doing is, we start off with the very first phase, maybe that is doing some research work, and based on the result of that research work, we may decide what will be the next phase and what would be the product or deliverable of that phase. And that's how we keep moving from iteration to iteration. Often the planning for next iteration is carried out as work progresses on the current iteration scope and deliverables. So we keep moving ahead like that. The work required for a given set of deliverables may vary in duration and effort. This also we understand that every iteration or every phase will have its own duration. But again, I would say, as I said, agile, although is an incremental life cycle model, but it is different from this cycle. Because in this cycle, what we are discussing here is that the duration of every phase might be different. And this depends upon whatever, you know, um, comes out as a result of the first phase. But when we are going agile, that is also an incremental cycle, but there's a different approach. In that, we fix the size of the duration or without assigning it any deliverable. We'll talk about that a little later. And the project team may change during iterations, between or during our iterations. These deliverables that are not addressed within the scope of the current iteration are typically scoped at a higher level only and may be tentatively assigned to a specific future iteration. So whatever we knew, how much we knew, we produced in this phase, and those things which did not know or which could not be included in this phase will be added to the next phase. So functionalities will be transferred to the next phase, and those next phases would then accommodate, and ultimately the product will have all the functionalities. Changes to the scope of an iteration are carefully managed once work begins, because within an iteration we do not want to change lot many things. We are all right, we are very adaptable after this phase. If somebody asks us to change something after this phase, we are all game. But if somebody wants us to change the current phase which we are currently executing, then probably this has to be very carefully, such changes should be carefully managed and handled. Iterative and incremental life cycle are generally preferred when an organization needs to manage changing objectives and scope. Highly flexible situation. Things are changing. We are not sure what we are creating, and the requirements are changing all the time. And sometimes to reduce the complexity of the project. A highly acutely complex project, we cannot handle it all together, so we start taking it in iterations. And when the partial delivery of a product is beneficial, maybe I am delivering a product which can be delivered in parts. I have to deliver a whole building, but I am saying, okay, first floor of the building will be complete and handed over to the customer, and we will keep working on the next phase, on the next floor, and so on and so forth. So partial delivery may be beneficial and provides value for one or more of the stakeholder groups without impact on the final deliverable or set of deliverables. Large and complex projects are frequently executed in an iterative fashion to reduce the risk by allowing the team to incorporate feedback and lessons learned between iterations. So we are in constant touch with the stakeholder. We are looking every phase, end of every phase, we are asking for their feedback. We are collecting the lessons learned. We are learning along the way, and we are bringing those improvements in the subsequent phases. So we are being educated throughout the process. Now talking about the adaptive life cycle, which I said although is the same iterative life cycle, but this is specific to the agile methods. These are highly change driven methods, agile methods, and they apply currently only to the IT project. But very recently, people from other industry sectors have also started considering moving on to the agile method, seeing the enormous benefits agile methods are bringing to the IT sector. Although it sometimes looks very difficult, how is it possible that agile methods can be applied to anything but IT? But many people have done some research and they are on to the job. At least I know of telecommunication sector which is already using agile methods in their work. So these are intended to respond to high level of changes where you need to have a lot of flexibility. your customer is changing his mind all the time, every time. And it's a very fluid situation. Although you have been given the job, but at the same time, the requirement of the job is changing all the time. Now, this is very troublesome. For a traditional project manager, it would be impossible to do. He would not like to get involved in such kind of a project. But here, what in agile method, what we do is we welcome change, because we understand that stakeholder or the customer is the king. Whatever he requires or demands or dreams should be made possible. So this way, we are not only, by this method, we are not only being able to accommodate all kinds of change, we are able to get the stakeholder involved all the time. And apart from all this, we are also faster in our work. Fast and flexible, highly flexible. Adaptive methods are again iterative and incremental in nature. But the differ in that their iterations are very rapid. That's why I said fast and flexible, not fast and furious, fast and flexible. So because the size of an iteration is very small, maybe 2 to 4 weeks or 6 weeks, so we can quickly do this iteration, produce results, and have a quick win. So we keep working in these quick wins and quick achievements, and customer will be satisfied what we are producing. On the other hand, we are keeping the ground open for the stakeholder to make any amendments to the work which has yet not started, which is everything remaining is the work which is ready to accommodate all kinds of changes. So high level of changes are there and we are not bothered about it. We are highly flexible. We are welcoming towards those changes because we know we are only focused on an iteration of 2 to 4 or 6 weeks. So these iterations are fixed in time and cost. Adaptive projects generally perform several processes in each iteration. Although early iterations may concentrate more on planning activities, naturally, whatever the project is, the earlier work would naturally involve a lot of planning. So whatever the iterations, maybe your planning work itself is done in 20 iterations. It doesn't matter. Here we are not really bothered about the number of phases. So our iterations could be maybe 200 iterations. But we are just, the spotlight is on the current iteration, and whatever is done is done. That has been approved. We are not going to redo it. We are just making the future available to be changed, while we focus only on a very small bracket of 2 to 5, 4 or 6 weeks. The overall scope of the project will be decomposed into a set of requirements and work to be performed, sometimes referred to as a product backlog. Now, I don't know if you are getting this, but this, what it says is, you do have an overall scope of the project, which might not be very clear. It might be, highly uncertain, and the scope is not really very clear. Even customer can't define his scope very well. But, he has given you a general picture. What we do is, we try to clarify the scope sitting with the customer and try to convert the whole scope into small little requirements. Is it the requirement you want to be included? Is it the requirement you want to be included? So whatever is the clarity of the project at that point in time, we break it down not into work packages, not into activities, but in requirements. And we prioritize these requirements. Say if there are 5,000 requirements, all these 5,000 requirements will be prioritized in the way they are desired to be achieved. What is the most important requirement for the customer? That will come on top. and the least important requirement will go at the bottom. This is called a product backlog. At the beginning of an iteration, the team will work to determine how many of the highest priority items on the product backlog list can be delivered within the next iteration. So first we determine the size of the iteration. Maybe say it is 2 weeks. We assign a small team for these 2 weeks, and this team may be about 8 to 10 people only. We bring these 8 to 10 people in front of the product backlog, which is ordered in order of priority, and ask them to look at the highest priority items on top and tell them how many can you do in 2 weeks. So the team mutually decides, looking at the work on top, they can do top job number 1, job number 2, job number 3. So they declare we will be able to accomplish top 3 jobs. Top 3 requirements will fulfill. So this is not somebody assigning job to these people. These people have been brought in front of the product backlog and have been given liberty to pick as many highest priority items as they can for their iteration, maybe of 2 weeks. Now they have chosen themselves. Nobody have imposed this work on them, and they take the sole responsibility of completing it. At the end of each iteration, the product should be ready for review by the customer. So they have taken 3 jobs, 3 requirements they have picked. So they are expected to complete these 3 items by the end of 2 weeks or 1 iteration. And that has to be reviewed by the customer. And only when the customer approves these 3 requirements, this iteration will be closed. This does not mean that customer is required to accept the delivery, just that the product should not include unfinished, incomplete or unusable features. Customer has to be there to review it. Customer can accept or reject it, and if at all this is rejected, that would be noted and the team will move on. Product should not be unfinished. It should be complete in nature. Only then the customer will approve it. The sponsor and customer representatives shall be continuously engaged with the project, and they will provide feedback on deliverables as they are created and to ensure that the product backlog reflects their needs, current needs. So now that the 3 jobs have been done, the remaining product backlog, if there is a change in requirements or there is a change in priority, so customer is free to change anything. He may bring an item which was on number 50 to top, and he says, now this is most important to me, so the next job done should be this. So this is, we are not really concerned about what the stakeholder wants. Whatever he wants, customer he wants, he will ask us to do in that fashion, in that order, and we will then bring that item on the top of the list, and the next iteration will start from there. Adaptive methods are generally preferred when dealing with a rapidly changing environment, when requirements and scope are difficult to define in advance, and when it is possible to define small incremental improvements that will deliver value to the stakeholder. So we start delivering early value due to these small iterations. So the customer is happy something is being delivered. On the other hand, customer is also happy that all his changes are being quickly implemented. Rapidly changing environment. So this brings us to the end of this first chapter, second chapter. Any questions?
Yes, so this is Vijay.
Ajib?
it's this agile process, so that the processes are fixed, right? So I mean, what's the advantage of fixed? What if they feel like in a particular phase, maybe next phase they can maybe go lesser time period.
Actually, your voice is breaking up. I don't know. Am I loud and clear to everybody?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is it Asad? You are trying to speak? Who is it who is speaking now? Who is breaking up? Okay, it is Rijo. Right, right. Okay, right, Rijo. I think there is something wrong at your end. If you can, write your question, I can answer that. Yes, please. Okay. A question which Rijo wanted to ask was, why are phase timings fixed in Agile? You see, because we are not very certain what is to be done, and we can't decide beforehand what what would be the size of the next phase. Because when I complete one phase, like you asked me to make a medicine, and I don't know what this medicine is and how this medicine can be created. Can it be created or not? So the very first logical thing comes to my mind is to set up a phase for doing research on that. So first phase is a research phase. I don't know how much time the research is going to take. So what I do is I dedicate say 2 months to the research, and not really 2 months, no, it all depends upon how much time the research will take. So maybe it takes 2 months or 3 months, and when I am able to produce some result, based on that result, then I say, okay, the next step is design. So then I start designing, and that will take its own time. That I'm talking about the traditional iterative method. But in Agile, what is happening? Because we want to deliver quick service to the customer, we want to give him a satisfaction that we are working and we are able to produce something even when the things are changing at a very fast pace. So what we do is we are fixing this time for the sake of those quick wins, number one. Number two, why were we unable earlier, why were we unable to make any changes? Why were we resistant to the changes? Because customer was asking us to change something which we were doing, and our phase was 6 months long. So I was expecting customer not to bother me in these 6 months. What if I reduce the size of my phase to 2 weeks? That means I am only expecting the customer not to bother me in these 2 weeks. And in the remaining work, it is all open to the customer. He can change anything and everything he wants. So number one, I have reduced the size of the phase, and secondly, I fixed the size to a specific duration and made the deliverable subservient to the time, rather than we were producing something and it was taking some time. Sometime in one phase it was taking more time, another phase was taking less time. What we have said is, done here is, we have created iterations, and all iterations are of equal size, a small size, and we are now accommodating work into that. How much work can be done in that? So this is also an example of servant leadership, where nobody is the boss. The person who you may call the project manager for a Scrum project, normally they call it a Scrum Master. The Scrum Master is not the autocratic leader of the team. He is just a servant leader who accommodates his team, who facilitates his team. He does not, cannot punish them or reward them in any way. He is actually a part of the team. So anyone out of the team could be declared Scrum Master, and you can even do it like that you can change the Scrum Master daily. On one day, member 1 is the Scrum Master. Other day, the member number 2 is the Scrum Master. This can all even be done. So Scrum Master is not irrepressible. Everybody can become Scrum Master and actually hold the power, hold the decision power, hold everything which has to be done is in complete control of the team. And we have left it on the team to decide how much work they can complete in these 2 weeks. We have not enforced our decision. You must do these 5 jobs. No, we are not telling them. We are just showing them the product backlog and asking them to pick as many jobs as they can do in 2 weeks time. So they will now run on self-pacing. If they've committed to do 3 jobs, they will do 3 jobs. And the interesting part of it is, what if they complete these 3 jobs in 1 week and 1 week is free? They are not going to rest. They are not going to rest because they cannot deliver, they have already delivered 3 jobs and everybody knows that they are doing nothing. So what they do is, they come back to the product backlog and they may pick another 3 jobs and go back to the same iteration. So that same iteration can have a more earned value by doing 6 jobs rather than 3. Claim was 3 jobs, but they did 6 jobs by the end of it. And it is also possible, let's say we take the example of this first iteration has been completed. They picked up 3 jobs and they completed 6. Now they understand they can perform better. This is called the velocity of the team. Now they understand their velocity, their speed. So now for the next phase, they will pick up 6 jobs maybe. So now they have picked up 6 jobs and they could complete 5, but they could not complete the 6th job. What will happen now? They will not be punished for that. That was their estimate. They will be able to do 6. There's a little overestimation. They did complete 5, but they could not complete the 6th job. So simply that 6th job will go back on top of the product backlog, and then the next iteration will start. And the next iteration will come and that will again start from the top of the product backlog, and they will pick as many jobs as they want to do. Did I answer your question? Actually, we do not want to change the duration. If it is fixed for 2 weeks, then it is good practice that we keep it 2 weeks for all iterations. Although there is a little possibility that you can have an iteration of 2 weeks and next iteration maybe of 4 weeks, but we don't allow that. You must decide beforehand what would be the size of your iteration. Is 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever. You fix that for whole of the project. So all the iterations should be of the same duration, but in exceptional cases, we can accommodate one odd iteration to be a little bigger or smaller, but generally it is not the case. There are a lot many things which can happen in Agile, but naturally we are not actually studying Agile at this stage. We are just referring it. The next standard, the next edition of PMBOK is going to be more Agile. What they are doing is, for every knowledge area, they are adding a section for agile techniques. So agile technique, here we are only mentioning agile in this chapter, only that much I've told you. This is the total agile covered in this. But in future, they are going to be more agile. So actually PMI is moving towards more agile project management, and that indicates that all types of project management, even construction, telecommunication, every type of project management is going to move towards the agile. Right. So this ends our second chapter. Let me, okay, but why don't we do another thing? We have got some time, and I don't want to start the new chapter right now. Why can't we have a small little test? Are you people ready for that? Yes, please. Okay, this is not a kind of assessment or something. I just want to see how much you have understood things, or maybe if not, that will not impact anything. This is a question paper of I think 20-25 questions, take about this much time which we are left with. I am launching this test, and you can do it online right now, right? And I would be able to monitor it. As soon as you complete and finish it, we will discuss it. I have started it. It must there must be an option coming in front of you. Okay, are you able to start it? Wonderful, wonderful. Move on.